This RealAg Radio podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. Change the game with BY7204LL, Brett Young's newest canola hybrid with Liberty Link technology.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio. Welcome to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Shaun Haney, your host here on this Wednesday midweek edition of the show. Thanks so much for making RealAg Radio and Rural Radio 147 a big part of your workday. And of course, a big shout out to everybody listening out there on the RealAg Radio podcast as well. It is great to have everybody here with us. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your neighbors, anybody interested in agriculture. It is great to make this audience bigger and bigger as it continues to grow week to week. Well, today's show is brought to you by SGS, delivering reliable agricultural lab testing for your crops, your soil, feed, water, and seed. Like that is a big portfolio and a whole bunch of different options. The scope of services at SGS is something that is unmatched anywhere in North America. SGS is uniquely positioned, ready to elevate your business in Canada and the United States. Call them now at 1-800-952-5407. That is 1-800-952-5407. It is great to have SGS aboard with us here today. We got a great show. Lots happening in the world of agriculture as per usual. We're going to hear from Ashley Knapton. She is with Leeder AgriServices, and she's going to talk about the benefits of testing feed and forage. What are we trying to accomplish? Why? What are the benefits? What should we be looking for? And how does it help us in our strategy with our livestock? We're also going to hear from SGS. We're going to hear from Jack Legg in a product spotlight. We're going to talk markets like we do every Wednesday. We got Ranulf Glanville here from GrainFox. Lots happening in the commodity markets, in particular the fact that things are changing a little bit. We got some crazy situation yesterday when it comes to obviously some bombing from Iran to Israel. We're not going to talk as much about that, but more talk about the fact that corn and soybeans have tried to find some higher prices in the last week. We're trying to work our way to the upside, getting that corn December contract away from 4 and a little bit closer to 4.25. We'll take it. But what does it mean for our marketing strategy? What is happening? Is it short covering? Is it fundamentals? What is driving it and how should you react? And we'll finish up today talking to Nathan Phinney. He's the president of the Canadian Cattle Association in our CCA update. He's going to talk about some private members bills that has him very concerned. In particular, we're going to talk about C-282, the bloc using it as leverage to basically try to keep the government standing. Could the government fall? Could we have an election all because the Liberals couldn't get 282 to become legislation? And do we really want that? Is it good for agriculture, bad for agriculture? It probably depends on which part of the industry you're coming from. Canadian Cattlemen's Association, very upset, or Canadian Cattle Association, I should say, very upset about 282 and some of the threat it provides to agricultural exports, especially relative to our exports to the United States. And there's some other private members' bills as well that have CCA concern. One about export or trying to ban the export of horses for slaughter. And I'm a little bit interested in that one as well, and the why are we doing this and is who's pushing it and all those kinds of things. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's program, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com. You can also find Real Agriculture across all the different social media platforms. You're also more than welcome to call the RealAg feedback line. That number is 855-776-6147. Of course, today's show is brought to you by SGS. Don't forget that. All of the testing, okay? If you are looking at testing, seed, your crops, your soil, your feed, your water, or your seed, make sure you think about SGS. Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we've got Ashley Knapton talking about the importance of testing your feed and your forage post-harvest. You're listening to RealAg Radio, Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM.
Your co-op grow team are your local experts because we live here too. Our agronomic specialists stay up to date with the latest research and technology to help support your entire farm operation. Talk to our team for advice tailored to your farm's needs. We have recommendations to help you optimize your crop yield and quality while enhancing the health of your land. Co-op, we're all growing together. Here for your farm, here for your family. Learn more at coop.crs/farm.
It's now time for a product spotlight with New Seed. Sean Walker, field sales manager for Montana. Tell us about the key benefits to the grower in North Dakota and Montana for the program this year.
We've got some really attractive premiums this year with our contract. Actually, a lot more flexibility in pricing. Canola markets aren't that great, but by being able to do the omega-3 program, one, we've got those premiums, and two, they're going to be able to honestly market this crop for, if they've signed a contract today, almost 2 years, which is really nice. Out here in Montana and North Dakota, we are somewhat in the middle of nowhere. Our contract is a freight on board contract, so picked up on farm, which is really nice. Still have an active God with this contract, and these guys that get to choose when they want to deliver as well. So some really positive pieces that when a grower is trying to decide, how can I make this work for my farm? The omega-3 program really thinks about how we can bring this specialty market to these growers.
That website is omega3canola.com. Great opportunity for growers in Montana and North Dakota. And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by SGS. We're going to talk about the importance of feed and forage testing here. We are joined by Ashley Knapton with Leeder AgriServices based out of South Mountain, Ontario. Ashley, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Sean, how's it going?
Hey, it's going pretty good. How's your fall been?
Yo, it's been beautiful. I mean, we have another stunning sunny day here. It's been a nice change from the wet summer, but get some of this crop off and see how we did this year. I'm excited.
Yeah, and let's talk about that, see how we did. Now, a part of that when we talk about crops is we always talk about yield, but quality is another, obviously a critical component, especially when we're feeding it to livestock. So let's start right off the top with the big question. Why is it important to have that data when it comes to feed and forage?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the most obvious answer is you can't manage what you don't know, right? So getting some of that hard data is just going to give us an idea of what some of the next steps we need to do are. And so maybe that's just nutritionally, just looking straight at, what are the nutrients in this ration? Where do we need to supplement? Where are we, exceeding maybe what we need? But it also kind of comes through into some of those other variables, right? Can we look at toxins? Were those a challenge this year? Do we need to manage for those? Those are really hidden. We can't see those until we maybe run into performance issues. So if we test a little bit earlier, just as a quick surveillance, we have an opportunity to prevent those issues from even really becoming a big problem, or even, just kind of gauging success, right? Can we look at how well our fermentation succeeded as a result of the fermentation report? If we did a good job packing, we're going to see that directly at the end in that fermentation report.
Yeah, and I think some beef operations, for example, have moved more into this area. But there was a time where it was like, silage is silage, and let the dairy people worry about some of those finer details. I don't think it's the case as much anymore, though.
I agree. And I think beef farms in particular, but anyone, you feed something and an animal's going to respond. And you can kind of guess what that feed is testing like based on that animal response. But instead of waiting 2 weeks for that animal to adjust to the new feed and really see when everything levels out, if we know in advance, we can narrow that timeline, right? We can feed the right thing right off the bat. You're just going to increase your performance a little bit better. And on the flip side, you're also not going to waste any money. So say we have to supplement extra energy in the form of grain corn or protein from your soy, soy products. Man, if we can avoid overfeeding those for 2 weeks, that's going to directly impact our bottom line right off the bat.
Yeah, because you can make the mistake of jumping to right now, my data says this, and now I've got to be upsold on the supplement package. But it can work the other way too, where you don't need to use some of those additional supplements because you've got it actually right there in the feed.
Yeah, absolutely. We know year to year that environment really changes. Even the same genetics, year to year, that environment is really going to dictate how that product performs. So we can have a clue, but we really need that hard data to confirm what we need. And I mean, if we can avoid overfeeding nutrients for 2 weeks, it's going to pay for the cost of a feed test very, very quickly, let alone if we can avoid even bigger health issues from something like toxins or something.
And similar to a soil test, I know when you get that report, it can be kind of intimidating, right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, I love all the numbers, but now what? And hey, that's where having access to someone like a nutritionist is, work with your nutritionist to come up with that plan to interpret some of those numbers for you and farmerize some of it for you, as I like to say.
Totally. I agree. And even if you maybe aren't working with a nutritionist, if that's something that you're not really working with, if you can understand what you had in your product last year and then compare it to this year's test, you can kind of start to say, if we look at corn silage, say you're a beef operation, you look at your corn silage, you can say, wow, in Eastern Ontario, we got a lot of rain. We have some really, really tall silage. Man, my starch level is lower than last year. Okay, that's a good sign that there's less overall energy. And so maybe you're not trying to make it a perfect science, but you can kind of say, just comparing year over year, product to product, there's an opportunity to increase the amount of supplemental corn ratting to try and get that same total energy in the ration. It doesn't have to be super intense. Obviously, I really prefer working with a nutritionist because they know the numbers inside and out. They can really translate that data for us, but even just understanding year over year what to expect in differences can help us really predict a lot.
So what's creating a lot of those differences year to year? Environment, growing conditions, the environment?
Yeah, I mean, rain is kind of the biggest culprit, I think, that we can see. Because rain influences, on silage in particular, it influences our overall ear size. So I kind of talk about our ear to stalk ratio, right? And so on a droughty year, we get smaller plants, but they'll probably still put a big ear on if we've done a good job with our fertility and weed control. Whereas this year, we're seeing plants hit their genetic potential on height. Man, we've got some really, really tall plants, but the ears aren't proportionally that much bigger. That's going to influence the overall kind of starch per mouthful that we get in that silage.
Curious. A lot of people. So timing of okay, before I get ahead of myself here, timing of the forage test. When do you do that and the frequency thereof that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So definitely before you feed is ideal. And so if that means you need to sample that fresh feed right as it's coming off the field, that's fine. It's not going to be the most accurate result, but it's going to be more accurate than no result, we'll say. But if you've got overlap in your silage, you don't need to go into it for another month. Go ahead and just sample it, a couple weeks before you're going to feed into it, or maybe a month later after it's had that chance to fully ferment. And then, how often do you sample? Well, that's going to depend a little bit on, are you seeing changes in the animal's performance? Is there unexpected things? Maybe they're eating too much, they're not eating enough, or, their performance has drastically deviated. Definitely do a sample right away then. Or if you just kind of want to keep tabs on it, definitely if you change, one bag to the next, worth double checking. If you know that you're going from one hybrid to the next, so different fields, might be worth double checking there too.
Yeah. Because in a seed situation, you would test multiple times through the year because you could see, say with the malt barley, you could see the germination drop in the winter months, and maybe you may see a change by the time you get to spring again. It's a living organism, right?
Totally.
So do we see less variable through the storage period with silage?
It's a good question. It depends a little bit on your storage type. So if you're in a bunker silo, when we take that whole face, we are able to blend a lot of the variables in a field all into one bucket, right? Because we're pulling all of those different layers together. Whereas if you're in a bag and say your chopper went through a really droughty spot or a tough spot in the field, suddenly there's going to be 25 feet of bag that are or silo, the same vibe. That are going to be, really impacted by that spot. So kind of understanding, where did different fields go, especially if I'm in a tower silo or bag situation and marking those out, then you can start to, be ready for noticing changes and whether you need to resample. Samples generally are really not a big investment. They are pretty economical. If you have any inclination that you should test, you should probably think about it.
Yeah. If you've got a massive silage bunker or pit, as some would call it, pulling one sample and doing a test,
that's it.
Yeah, we've probably got to do some cume samples, right?
Yeah, and I mean, even I would say too, if you have that big face, grabbing from all over the face, right? Because that's what you're going to do when you deface it to put it into the mixer. Grabbing from all over is going to be the way to go to make sure that you're grabbing a representative sample. Because you're right, we're really capturing just a moment in time. As much as it's giving us more data than not testing, it is also just a small fraction of that whole bunk. So we might as well do the best we can to try and make it as representative as possible.
How is the knowledge in this whole area evolved and changed in terms of our understanding of the quality and the data, the characteristics of that feed and forage, knowing what that data is, putting it into the animal, seeing the output on the other end, and that feedback loop. How have we evolved in that area?
I would say I've kind of been in this area for about 10 years. And one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that we are improving the nutrients that we're testing for. Testing has always been accurate. Like, I always feel confident sending a sample away that what we get back, assuming I took a good sample, I have no doubt in what the lab is doing. But what's changed is we're getting more accurate nutrients. We used to talk about crude protein. Cows don't use crude protein. It's the breakdown. It's those subsequent protein types that they use. So now that we are getting a better job of understanding those things, then we can make better, decisions based on, 22% protein in your haylage doesn't tell me much. I need to know more about, the bypass proteins. Those kinds of things are going to tell me a lot more. So we're learning more about those, which means we can balance better rations. I think we're getting really good at recognizing what different performance variances in cattle in particular, what they say about that ration. We can look at manure now and say, interesting, we're seeing bubbling, we've got some acidosis. The other thing is, on the dairy side of things, we collect a lot of data from our milk tanks. And as we kind of see those MUNs, those free fatty acids, that's additional information to tell us how cows are responding to rations, which can then allow us to revisit. So we're kind of, instead of just working one way, which would be feed test, ration, result, we're kind of working both ways now to get to that ideal ration.
Yeah, and obviously producers are always looking to make sure they're spending their money the right way. To me, having access to this kind of information is not one of the places. This is kind of critical. We're in the business of feeding animals, right?
Yeah.
And so it's critical to know what the characteristics are.
I mean, think about the labels on our feed packaging, right? Like
right.
Food packaging, I guess we would call it, right? There's lots of data in there and we know what we kind of need. Why shouldn't we kind of have the same idea for cattle too?
Well, cattle, sheep,
100%.
Hogs,
yeah,
goats, whatever.
Even horses, it's really important to understand, what kind of sugar content they can really be impacted by. Monogastrics in particular are significantly more impacted by toxins. So yeah, it doesn't matter what species it is. You need to know what you're feeding them. Absolutely.
Yeah, super cool stuff. Well, hey, Ashley, thanks a lot for joining us here today on RealAg Radio. I really appreciate it.
Anytime, Shaun. Thanks for the invite.
That is Ashley Knapton with Leeder AgriServices based out of South Mountain, Ontario. Well, we got a lot of ground yet to cover here on RealAg Radio, brought to you by SGS, and we'll be right back with SGS right after this.
Doing more in the field is possible when you add the proven power of Anvil Nitrogen Stabilizer, the next generation dual-active urease inhibitor from Koch Agronomic Services. Driven by Duramide technology, Anvil gives growers the advantages of low application rate and long-lasting protection, all thanks to Duramide, a Koch-patented active ingredient. Defend against volatilization, boost efficiency, accomplish more. Learn all about the dual-active power of Anvil by visiting anvil.ca. That's ANVOL.ca.
There's a reason we call it the Corn School. Videos on everything from planter setup to weed control, field trial results, and the latest yield strategies. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com has the information and advice you need to help you succeed. Brought to you by Pride Seeds and BASF. Corn School episodes are available at cornschool.com, from RealAgriculture.com, or as a podcast in your favorite podcast app. Check out the latest Corn School episode today.
Get ready for tillage season with the high-speed disc from Brandt. Cut and size residue, create ideal seed beds, and level ruts faster than any other tillage machine. It's a better field finish and fewer passes, so you can stay on schedule no matter what fall throws at you. And right now you can get yours with a $12,000 rebate. There's never been a better time to bring your operation up to speed. Visit Brant.ca for details.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Wednesday. Today's show is brought to you by SGS. And speaking of SGS, we're going to talk to Jack Legg. Hey, Jack, how are you doing?
Doing well, Shaun. Glad to be here.
Yeah, hey, it's great to have you on the program. You are SGS's business development manager. Now, as one of SGS Guelph's longest tenured employees, you've been around for a while. We don't need to say how many years, but tell us about the transition, the growth of the services of that lab over the last 40 years.
Yeah, of course. So our facility started in the early 1980s when it was the lab that was contracted to do all of Ontario's agricultural soils under a subsidized program. That program ended late 80s. 1990, the lab became privatized and then started expanding out into other testing, such as feed and forage. From that time, we've added in different things. GPS, soil sampling, precision agriculture was starting in the mid-90s. Since then, we've grown into greenhouse testing, controlled environment agriculture, so things like vertical farms that are testing their resources to maintain crop production and optimize their growth.
Yeah. At the beginning of the show, I was talking about the wide scope of services that SGS Canada does provide. Let's talk about some of the testing that SGS Guelph does.
Yeah, so at our facility, we're predominantly testing for nutrients. So soil testing for fertility to manage crop production. Same in the greenhouse world, but they're testing water and the soil is growing media. And then the livestock side of things, we're testing the feeds and forages and feed ingredients to optimize nutrition and maximize, or at least try to optimize growth and production for the farmer.
Yeah, giving the farmer that data, right? We talked about that earlier with Ashley Knapton about the importance of feed and forage testing earlier in the show here. Giving that farmer the data to be able to make better decisions.
That's right. Agriculture is fairly high tech now, where it's not just planting the crop and hoping for the best. It's managing your bottom line. The producer isn't just a farmer anymore. He's a business person that has to understand the cost of production. And in doing so, we're providing those measurements that they can make those management decisions, namely with testing of all the resources that are going into the farm production.
Yeah, and it's that service that really helps contribute to the farmer's success. You kind of feel you're a part of the operation and helping them to make the right business decisions.
Yeah, of course, and that's our role. But SGS also has many different labs in the network, so we can help out from an environmental standpoint. Maybe it's heavy metals testing or contaminants. We've got seed testing capabilities. So although we in Guelph are doing predominantly that nutrient testing, we've got a lot of partners out there and some interesting subcontractors that can help with other services as well.
Yeah. Now, Jack, I mentioned I wasn't going to say how long you've been around the lab, but it has been around 28 plus years. How have you seen the scope and the lab service industry? How have you seen it evolve, and what have you seen in your career?
Yeah, it's really evolved over the years, mainly from the speed of things. Back when we started, we were mailing out reports, for example. The fax machine, that was a pretty great invention, but in the early days, we had to drive those reports to a different facility and send them by fax. So, starting out with online access to your data to now, email, instant download. A lot of people are looking for that speed, moving at the speed of business. And also the testing from a wet chemistry perspective over to spectroscopy, different ways of getting those measurements that are faster, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly.
Now, the lab is celebrating its 40th anniversary in Guelph. Give us some additional points on some of the lab's history.
Right. So going way back, it was the only lab that was accredited, and they've added different labs in Ontario that are accredited to do soil testing in Ontario now. We've also grown. The greenhouse business is really burgeoning now, especially after the pandemic, and places are looking at sustainability. If borders shut down, they want to make sure they have food production much more production going on locally in cities, growing strawberries and leafy greens, things of that nature. We've also seen more regulation or voluntary certification for our nutrient sustainability, for example, has really driven soil testing. Some of the different acts like the NASM Act, non-ag source material, has meant that farms need to be approved to receive any sort of application of nutrients that aren't manure or fertilizer. So some of those things have evolved over the years to build the soil testing that we're doing, as well as giving the society more confidence in what farmers are doing to show they're doing it in a responsible manner.
Yeah. Great stuff. Well, Jack, congratulations on the 40-year anniversary of the SGS Guelph Lab. All the best to you, and thanks today for SGS being the sponsor of today's show.
Thanks so much. We're very proud of our longevity, and it was nice to come on and spread the word.
Yeah.
Thanks, Shaun.
You should be very proud of that longevity. That's 40 years. That is quite an accomplishment. And you can find out more about SGS to help you elevate your business by calling 1-800-952-5407. We'll be right back here on RealAg Radio, brought to you today by SGS. We're going to be talking markets with Ranulf Glanville of GrainFox right after this.
If you have a growing list of questions about getting more from your fields, know that Koch Agronomic Services has an answer for every acre. With a full spectrum of nutrient management, nutrient protection, and seed enhancement options, Koch Agronomic Services offers a deep portfolio of agronomically effective products. Each designed to enhance yield potential, all available to help solve your problems. Find the answer that's right for your acres. Start by visiting kochag.ca. That's KOCH ag.ca.
What were the issues in your fields this year? Did you do a soil sample? What is your soil sample telling you about some of the nutrient issues that you might be having going into next year? What herbicides did you use? What residues you might be concerned about? What weed issues did you have? What crop residues did you have? How well do you know your fields?
Get the answers to all the questions you have about your pulse crop at the Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio. Today's show is brought to you by SGS, delivering reliable agricultural lab testing for your crops, soil, feed, water, and seed. SGS Canada is uniquely positioned, ready to elevate your business in Canada and in the U.S. Call us now at 1-800-952-5407. Let's talk markets. We're joined right now by Ranulf Glanville. He is with GrainFox, based out of Ontario, Canada. Ranulf, how are we doing today?
Excellent. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, hey, lots happening. And you know what? I think we can say here, talking broadly about the corn and bean market right now, corn, you look at the December chart, Ranulf, we are trying to sort of gradually work our way higher. Is this an encouraging sign, or what is the market telling you here right now?
Absolutely. It's a very encouraging sign. I think that if we look at the corn futures market, it's moving up from the lows made in late summer. And this is fantastic. It tells us that a lot of the news about the big U.S. crops, the big corn crop, the big soybean crop, these were actually in the market before harvest even really got going in the U.S. So it's a very encouraging setup for anybody in those markets.
And with, we're kind of at harvest time. Obviously, we're, we've got a long ways to go when it comes to the corn harvest, but kind of unseasonal. Is that the way to describe this move to the upside?
Absolutely. When you talk about the corn market, everybody knows, quote unquote, that corn doesn't bottom in August. Corn bottoms in November or early December when the U.S. harvest reaches, let's say, 60 to 70% complete. And 9 years out of 10, those tendencies that everybody hears about from the time they're just a little person at their farmer and father and mother's knees on the farm, those hold. The time when it doesn't tend to hold, those seasonal odds can get distorted, is in very big crop years. And that's actually what we're in this year in the U.S. If you've been tracking the USDA with their yield forecasts, their production forecasts, it's just been heavy all through the summer. And so we get to the point where the market actually starts to form a low before we would normally think of it. And that's something we tried to talk about a little bit on some of our GrainFox podcasts as the summer was going along. And now it's encouraging that it does seem to be happening.
In the old bottoms can become the new tops once we break through those thresholds. You look at the December corn, it kind of looks like we may have a bit of a resistance on this move upwards if we potentially got in that 450, 455 range. Is that kind of what you see on December corn?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're already starting to see a little bit of resistance in the 425 area, and 450, there should be more resistance. Just sort of scanning not just the December daily chart, but some of the weekly charts. That 450 area is a sort of a roundish number that a lot of farmers are going to be drawn to for sales. So I think the message is to be optimistic, but still cautiously so. The other thing I would point out is that notwithstanding all the things I just said about the market performing quite well, we still have, as of Sunday, 79% of the U.S. corn crop to come off and almost all the Canadian grain corn crop. So this is billions and billions of bushels that have yet to cross the scales. So it is quite possible that these markets could correct at some point. That's certainly something we'll be watching for.
Yeah, and if you do think you need to take some risk off the table, maybe don't wait for the 450. Maybe maybe here or maybe at 440 where you put your targets. But I always cautious about I think it's going to get to 450 and you put your target at 450 and we get to 447, something like that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a great saying that everybody sees the same charts, and if you're sitting back from across the room and you're saying, well, 450 is the natural target, the problem is that chances are a lot of other people are seeing the same thing. So anytime we're talking targets for a sale, I don't love round figures, and I would generally try to put it a little bit below where you anticipate everybody else is, if it's important to you to sell. And that's kind of the way you framed it a few moments ago. I think there are lots of people who will be looking to add to sales into this rally. That may be people that don't have storage for all their corn, people who want to generate some cash flow, or people who are choosing to store other crops and simply don't have the space for their corn.
Yeah, and we've been talking mainly about corn here, but soybeans have been trying to move, do the same sort of step progress upwards. Are soybeans coming up for the same reasons as corn?
Yeah, the one thing I should have mentioned in the corn section also that definitely relates to soybeans is these rallies are partially being driven by short covering or repositioning by the speculative funds.
Oh, I like that.
And so what they're doing is they were heavily short at the lows in the summer, and now they're repositioning. That's adding to this rally. Also, this same concept applies for soybeans, that a lot of the news about the heavy U.S. supply appeared to be in the market before harvest began. The one thing I would say about soybeans also that they still have a lot of potential to feel some harvest pressure. The U.S. harvest was only, I believe, 26% done as of Sunday. So there again, billions and billions of bushels yet to come.
Yeah, and that makes sense on the short covering, because if you look at, say, the November canola chart, it's not the same pattern. It's far more choppier, which tells you there's different things. It's not just the general oilseed complex moving higher. For fundamental reasons, there's other things at play here. Is that fair?
100%. So canola is one of those markets where prices have come up from their lows. Maybe they just got oversold a few weeks ago. But if you look at the fund positioning in canola, they're actually almost as short now as they've been any time in the past 5 or more years. So still really negatively positioned in canola. And there's obviously fundamental reasons for that. One of which is ongoing harvest in Western Canada, another of which is the Vancouver port situation, which now thankfully appears to be resolved or headed towards a resolution. Yep. So that's going to take a little bit of pressure off canola. But then in the background, we still have this whole trade situation with China lurking. And so that's why I think canola justifiably has lagged some of the gains in, let's say, soybeans.
There's a lot of rumors floating around that, China could put duties on Canadian canola in November, December. I had somebody else tell me January. Who knows what the story is? Obviously, it's something that the industry is concerned about. Is that kind of anticipation of a bad result? Is that priced into the market, or is the market waiting to know what that actual amount would be, or how do you see this?
Well, I guess my take on it, I love what you said about the uncertainty, because there is considerable uncertainty, not only how China will proceed, when they will proceed, how serious any repercussions would be. With all that in mind, the thing I would say is the initial reaction from canola futures was extremely negative. The market slammed to new lows when the news first came out. We did see sort of a snapback, a yo-yo effect, which is normal because China didn't immediately follow through and initiate the anti-dumping investigation and get the process moving towards a clearly punitive outcome. So the futures bounced back, and now they're in this sort of wait and see mode. The working assumption that we've had at GrainFox is that China is likely to proceed, unfortunately, because we don't see the Canadian government flip-flopping on some of the issues that appear to be behind this situation with China. So it is quite likely China will proceed, but we're being very cautious about trying to guess when and how significantly this will impact the export program for Canadian canola, because there are a lot of unknowns. I think in the export program, we've already seen a bit of front loading of business.
Yes.
Where through the first, let's say, 7 weeks of the CGC data, exports of canola actually got off to a pretty good start.
Yeah, Western Grain Elevator Association said exactly that relative to the Port of Vancouver terminal strike, right? That there was a lot of canola trying to get front loaded and get out of here, but before there was any sort of a duty applied, which makes a lot of sense, and we should see those export numbers be higher. What's going on in South America? What's the update there? Because this is the time that we hear a lot about it, and it has an impact on these markets here back at home.
Yeah, great question. So if the US and Canada are today's news, South America is tomorrow's news. And the reason I say that is a few things about South America, and they'll really become the market factor moving into, let's say, December, January, February, when South American yields and production are really being determined. The expectation for South America as a whole is for a huge soybean crop and for a very large corn crop. And so part of that is being built into our prices, our markets, that there's this looming production bulge in the Southern Hemisphere, specifically Brazil and Argentina. But something interesting is happening, and that is that as farmers are well aware, Mother Nature will have the final say on all this. And there's been some early dryness problems in northern Brazil. It's too early to matter. I mean, this is akin to a problem in Canada in April or March, but it's creating a little bit of excitement and a little bit of an idea that maybe not everything is a done deal in South America. And so Brazil's been dry in September. There are better rains in the forecast for the second half of October, but obviously confidence looking that far out is a little bit low. And so I think that's going to feed into some volatility in terms of what happens with these markets moving forward.
Yeah, and we just like here, we try to kill the crop 2 or 3 times, and there's this information discovery process that goes on, and the market trying to sort out what's real, what's not, and it's until the combines start to roll, it's hard to know for sure. But before we wrap up here, what are some other things in the market that you're watching here right now that farmers need to be aware of and stay on top of as well?
Well, there's a lot of other things going on. I guess one of the first things I would say that is of general interest to the markets is that China came out with a huge stimulus package last week. And a farmer might say, well, why do I care? That doesn't really matter. China has the world's second largest economy, and the Chinese stock market has reacted tremendously to this, posting the most gains in 9 days in the history of the Chinese stock market. So it means that optimism in China and about China is increasing. This doesn't tell us immediately that China is going to line up and buy more Canadian pork, or that they're going to, turn their cheek in terms of canola or other things. But it's certainly a positive signal for global markets, not just stock markets, but for commodities in general, given China's massive size. The other thing I would say is we're into a series of interest rate cuts in Canada and the United States. Again, a lot of farmers will say, well, why is this of interest? And the reason it's of interest, there are literally billions and billions of dollars of debt rolling over in the coming year, not just residential debt or farm debt, but really across the spectrum. So this is going to be a very interesting story to track in the year ahead. And then for a market like wheat, I think there's a lot of fascinating things going on in terms of a country like Russia, which is seeing dryness in parts of their southern growing regions, excess rain in other areas. Ukraine is having problems with dryness as they plant winter wheat. So it's always a very dynamic wheat market globally. And I think when I look at the wheat market for Canadians, we've seen a bit of a rally off the summer lows. And that's a market where I think there's the potential for more strength ahead when we look into later in the marketing year.
Fascinating stuff. Ranulf, I really appreciate it. Thanks so much. Keep up the great work at GrainFox. If somebody wants more information on GrainFox, how do they find it?
www.grainfox.ca, and certainly we'd welcome trials and requests for more information.
Yeah, even I can remember grainfox.ca. That is Ranulf Glanville from GrainFox. We'll be right back with more of RealAg Radio, brought to you today by SGS.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety, enhanced weed control, and a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
Peter Johnson at WheatPete, RealAgriculture.com. I'm the host of The Word, and I love doing The Word. I love the questions. I love the challenges. I love having to apply agronomics to all over the globe and areas outside of my normal jurisdiction. Also, I love the feedback the most, where growers challenge me, tell me about their plot results, help me to learn. The Word, absolutely the best part of my day.
And welcome back to RealAg Radio, brought to you today by SGS. And we're going to talk about some of the private members' bills that are taking up some of the oxygen right now in Ottawa. We're talking to the president of the Canadian Cattle Association, is Nathan Phinney. Nathan, how's it going?
Great, Shaun. How are you?
Man, I'm doing pretty good. Okay, so lots happening from a private members' bill standpoint. You know, there was a time where private members' bills, like, who cares? Don't pay attention to them. But boy, they are, in this minority government, they are getting some traction. And you need to pay attention, because what you think may not be an issue could be one, depending on how it works its way through the House and the Senate. The one that I know you at CCA have been paying a lot of attention to is 282. It seemed kind of like it was sort of dead, or not, maybe forgotten, not going to move any further in the Senate. And now all of a sudden the Bloc has the power after the NDP left their agreement with the Liberals. And one of the conditions the Bloc has put on the Liberals is get 282 passed. This is some concern for, I imagine, the cattle sector.
Well, not just the cattle sector, but overall trade policy. And it doesn't even matter if you're in agriculture, or if you're in automotive or aluminum or softwood lumber, or I can go on and on. 90% of agriculture is free trading open market. 10% is supply management. So that in itself is kind of questioning us why this ludicrous bill is still being out there, potentially harming 90% of agriculture that rely on free traders. But then if you look at the economy as a whole, in the business world that drives, our economy, that's less than 1% supply managed. So why are we going to dabble around and play around with a bill that potentially could set precedents and be as dangerous as this? And you're right. When the coalition between NDP and Liberals broke, the Bloc came up and said that they wanted this passed through. And again, is Canada or the federal government willing to adhere to less than 1% of the economic business world in Canada to appease a party that basically, Blanchette cares about Quebec and not the rest of Canada? So I really think it's time for everybody outside of agriculture, whether it be the Business Council or the Chamber of Commerce, who also has a very small amount of members that sit on there that are supply management, and start listening to everybody else that isn't supply management and stand up for what's right.
What's interesting about 282 to me is a lot of people want to make it, and this is how it was in the House. The vote happened, and it was sort of like who supports supply management and who doesn't. And I think that's making it way too simple. I actually, whether you're for or against 282, and I've said this in my speeches, I don't think, if you're against 282, it doesn't mean you're against supply management. It's the premise of the bill is to basically say it's market access going forward for supply managed products is off the books. It cannot be given up anymore in trade deals. And that's different than being pro or against supply management. And I talked to some dairy farmers, for example, in my speeches through last winter, and they're like, you know what, obviously I believe in supply management. I think this is a bad idea. So not all dairy farmers, let's not group them together. They're not all in favor of 282, like some may suspect.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that we're opposed to supply management. It's a system that's been in place for a number of decades, and it works for their system. But why completely undermine and erode all the free traders that are out there? And if it's been your standing policy forever to protect it, then protect it. Doug Forsyth was at committee hearing, one of the chief negotiators, and said that this would be precedent setting for Canada, who touts themselves as being a world trader and known as a trading country, that will be the first country to go in with something like this. Last night we were looking at Kamala Harris tweets coming out, and she was talking specifically about CUSMA. And her intent, a lot of it was around autos, but her clear intent was to use that platform in 2026 to kind of renegotiate, not just a review, but to tear that up and dive into it. And we heard very clearly, the amount of times we're in the States, that if something like this had been in place back when the CUSMA or NAFTA negotiations were happening, the deals would have not happened. And then, therefore, you're hurting the whole Canadian economy and not just one small sector. So again, I really am disappointed that it has gotten to this point. Blanchette has passed a motion in the House to try to expedite the Senate to get this through. Thank God for the Senate right now to study this bill and see the negative effects that this will have on Canada as a whole.
Yeah, and listen, I understand the irony. There's probably some listeners saying, wait a minute. So we wanted the Senate to move fast on 234, the carbon tax bill, but we want the Senate to act slow on 282. Yeah, I understand it. It depends on your perspective on both of those bills and what you want the Senate to do. 355. What is C-355?
It's a horse ban exporting horses by air, live horses for export. And again, it goes along with a bill C-283, which is a bill that's been put forth by Nate Erskine-Smith on eating more plant-based. Both of these bills are not science or rules-based bills. They're bills based on emotion. And, for a trading country like Canada that relies heavily on exports to keep our economy strong, we cannot continue to allow these private member bills that are based on nothing short of personal preference or emotion to make their way to where they are. We are science and rules based. Our agriculture minister, federal minister Macaulay, has said that. We've heard that from the federal government of today. They support science and rules based. Those are the principles that we need to adhere to and make sure that we're continuing to follow. And, I think it's kind of naive to think that, back to 282, if you look at downtown Toronto, where a vast majority of the seats are sitting and a lot of the business happens in the business communities down there, or some of these bigger cities, if you think passing a bill like this is going to help you on either side of party that supports this going forward, I think you got to really look in the mirror and reflect of how mistaken you are. This 282 could be crippling to our economy with our biggest trading partner.
Yeah, I want to clarify. C-355 is not only the prohibiting the export of, but it's horses for the purpose of slaughter is what the export ban is tied to. This to me is an example, though, like, although that may, I'm curious as to the why of that. And I always think sort of thin edge of the wedge, and I don't want to be hyperbolic about it, but if we're willing to ban the export of horses for slaughter, then what is next? And although Canadians, it's not a tradition and a custom to slaughter horses for food consumption, other cultures that we do a lot of trading with, France, Austria, I believe Switzerland is another one that horse meat is common. For sure, France. This isn't like we're not shipping it to the moon and aliens are consuming the horses. I have personally, although I'm not having horse steaks this Sunday, I don't know why we're so particular on this issue.
One of the biggest countries and one of our friendliest trading partners is Japan. And
right. Yes,
they've really been loud here out of their embassy on this bill. And more or less, you're exactly right. It's not a product that is consumed heavily here in Canada, but in other countries they are. And horses are deemed as livestock. And two things: we're worried about the precedent setting by first it's horses, and then what's next that you can't transport for slaughter. And then as a country that's talking about food security and being a country that can help solve world hunger and supply product to the rest of the globe and here domestically, now we're going to dictate to these countries of what proteins are suitable for them to consume and not consume. Yeah. I think this is very, very dangerous setting.
Well, hey, Nathan, I'll give you an example. Let's just use the cow, for example. Okay, so in Canada, we love our tenderloin, the rib steak, the T-bone, like we've got our cuts that we prefer. But the total value of the carcass is important, and there are lots of cuts and there's lots of components of that cow that we ship all over the world that likely if you had it at your local Loblaws, no one's buying it. And I don't really see that much of a difference in this case. And I know that probably some of our audience is going to, provide some feedback, and that's fine. Maybe you disagree and you're entitled to that, but I just don't see much of a difference.
No, and it's a backwards model to production that what most people are accustomed to. You buy the pieces as low as cost you can, you assemble the final product, and you sell it for a cost. When we're dealing with livestock, we have a finished product that we have to break down into portions to be saleable, to be able to move them. And you're exactly right. Every country, every demographic has certain portions that they desire, that they want to consume. We're cutting out roughly 300 different products out of a single animal. And international trade and good trade policy is bringing back $1,300 to $1,400 per head. That is what is keeping us on a competitive edge. And the minute that you start dictating, well, you can't export that because certain private members bills such as 355 come along, we're going down a very dangerous slope with this. So this is another bill that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, not a surprise. This is in the mandate letter of the Minister of Agriculture as well. So this one's been on the radar for quite some time. Hey, Nathan, really appreciate you joining us here today on RealAg Radio. All the best to you.
No problem, Shaun. Thanks. Anytime.
That is Nathan Phinney. He is president of the Canadian Cattle Association, talking to us from his ranch in New Brunswick. Hey, if you have any feedback on today's show, we'd love to hear from you. Send me an email, shaney@realagriculture.com, or you can call the Real Ag feedback line, 855-776-6147. Of course, today's show was brought to you by SGS, delivering reliable agricultural lab testing for your crops, soil, feed, water, and seed. Like, what a scope of services. SGS is uniquely positioned, ready to elevate your business in Canada and the U.S. Call them now at 1-800-952-5407. Thanks so much, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Radio. We'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.
Thank you for downloading this episode, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their new BY7204LL canola with Pod Defender shatter tolerance and Defender rated club root protection. Talk to your local retailer today.